And time to start page number 2 of the morning magazine. And to help us do that, as he does every Thursday about this time, his name is David Stokes with the Show Me Institute in once again for Show Me at the Lake. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm doing great, Manny. Great to be with you and your listeners.
Well, let's get into our conversation here. We've got a couple different things we want to talk about again. The first thing we want to get into is, I think, a little unique to the lake area because of maybe the way the landscape is set up. But we have a lot of private roads, and one of the things we're going to talk about is, there can be some problems with that.
Absolutely. There can be a difficult situation, and I'll say it's probably not unique to the lake area, but it's interesting that it is unique to Missouri. Missouri is sort of the places, St. Louis and the lake and elsewhere, where we do have a lot of private streets and private places. In fact, if you go to the Wikipedia entry for the term private place, it's all about Missouri. That's all they talk about there. But the history of privately owned and maintained roads has a long one here in our state, and I think on the whole it's been a good thing. But as some residents I think it was Camdenton, are finding out, there can be problems with it.
Well, let's talk about this situation in Camdenton a little bit. We're referencing an article that was in Lake Expo a few weeks ago here. I guess give us a little background on this situation there in Camdenton.
Well, a nice article in lakeexpo.com on it, provided some great background. And what you have here is a situation where the developer of a private street, of a private new subdivision in the Camdenton area, didn't follow through for whatever reason, be it maybe the business failed. I don't know why he or she didn't follow through, but they didn't follow through on finishing and maintaining the road along that was connecting the houses that they sold and the new residents there to the rest of the city. So you've got some people along these streets there that are really in a tough situation there because the road is, by all accounts, just in terrible shape and damaging their cars and make difficult in bad weather getting in and out of their street. But and they've gone to the City Council of Camden asking for help, and this is just a very difficult situation for all involved. I think everybody at Camdenton city government wants to do something, but they're sort of limited in what they can do in their defense.
Well, that does set up a very unique situation because a lot of times I think when people think about roads and infrastructure, most of the time you think about how cities and municipalities and counties and states, for that matter, have to take care of roads. If you put that then in the hands of a private person or private entity, for example, then all of that falls on them. And then in this case, if something changes, something falls apart, that makes it even more of a problem then.
It absolutely does, and it can work out well. I live on a private street. I live on a private street in University City in St. Louis's Central Corridor, where you have a lot of private streets and private neighborhoods. And I know you grew up pretty close to where I live, so you probably remember those private streets at the time. And you also have a lot of them in the Ozarks. If you get enough people along that private street who can contribute to the maintenance and the upkeep, then it can work out just fine. No one family has to pay an overly burdensome amount. But if you have a really small private street and perhaps a situation, and this is perhaps what occurred in Camdenton, where a developer has trouble, so they're not able to sell all of the lots for whatever reason. So you don't have enough people, you don't have as many families as necessary to maintain the road at an affordable amount. This can really be some long-term problems. And I know, again, Camdenton wants to help, and there should be a process for cities to take over private streets in certain situations, and there is. But you can't just expect the city to come in and spend tens of thousands of dollars to fix an otherwise private street up right away. I mean, they've got to look out for the interests of their other taxpayers, too.
Well, and you mentioned, the St. Louis area does have a lot of private roads. You have a lot of those in Kansas City, Springfield as well. I think even down in Cape Girardeau, they have some of those. And part of it is, and you've already kind of hinted at it, part of it is you have to get everyone involved in that community. And it could just be a situation in Camdenton where, again, it may fall back on the developer or the company or whatever it might be. But in many cases, it does take the residents of that area to, again, kind of work together to help with the maintenance upkeep of that road.
Right, and if you have enough of them and you have a neighborhood association to manage it, it can work really well. But if you don't have enough residents, or if they're not working together, or if, which appears to have happened here, the road just never gets properly finished in the first place, and the developer is the one responsible for that, then these fixes can get unbelievably expensive for the people who live upon it, and probably perhaps beyond the reach of some of them. So then you're just in a situation where they appeal to the government to help them out. And look, there is a process. It does happen in Missouri where private roads are turned over to city or county control, but rarely do the city and the county just take over it and then take over a bad road and then just fix it at no charge to the residents. They generally require that the road be up to city or county standards first, and then they'll take it over. So that's how it normally happens in this state, and that appears to really be the situation that these residents in Camdenton are facing, in that Camdenton would be forced to spend many thousands of dollars to bring this road up to their standards if they take it over. And since it is a private road, since the residents knew that when they bought those houses, I mean, Camdenton's in sort of a bind here. I'm sympathetic to both the residents of the street and also the city officials here.
It is, and it's also worth noting here, when you talk about a situation like this, you really have a crossover between I guess a public entity and the government. In other words, the private sector intersecting with the government, and that's not always the case with everything, especially when you talk about things like infrastructure.
Absolutely. And, outside of Missouri, this problem would be very, very rare. But here in this state, as we've discussed, you do have a lot of these sort of private roads. And many of them, you go back a little ways, they used to have where they were involved in private sewer systems as well. And in parts of central Missouri and rural Missouri, you probably still have a lot of these private sewer systems too. So it's this infrastructure which people build for themselves, and it usually works out well, and it works out well throughout our state. But sometimes there are issues, and when there are problems like this, people in 2013, people are not used to the private infrastructure that they might have been 50 years ago. You expect the government to provide many of these things. So you get yourself in a bind. Maybe now when you buy the home on a private street, you don't fully realize what that means for maintaining your own infrastructure now. And if you don't fully understand it, you can be in for quite a surprise. When we bought our house a year ago, we were fully aware that it was a private street and what that entails. And we knew that a few years down the road, pun intended, we were going to get a bill to redo the streets here. And we're expecting that, and we know that's coming. But if you don't recognize that, if you're not aware of that, that can be quite a bite you get.
Absolutely. We are talking with David Stokes here on this week's edition of Show Me at the Lake on News Talk 1150, 97.5 KRMS. All right, let's change things up here a little bit, and let's talk about an article that's out this week. It's in the Lake Business Journal, and that is talking about, part of it is discussing golf courses, and the other part is showing how that is tied into property taxes. So what's the correlation here?
Well, it's a nice story on the history of golf in the Lake Ozark area. And golf, I know, is such a big part of the Ozarks. I was in the Ozarks last month for a bachelor party, and we played 9 holes at Osage National, and I loved it. I thought it was a terrific course. And golf in the Ozarks, that's a big industry. We're talking jobs there. And I don't think people know that golf courses, and I think it's interesting, are treated differently from property tax purposes than most other businesses. Golf courses are generally taxed at the residential rate and not the commercial rate. And that's one of the reasons why I think the fees at public courses in our state are pretty reasonable. If they were taxed at the commercial rate for property taxes with all the property that's obviously involved in a golf course, your cost to play a course would be a lot more. So I think it's a reasonable compromise on a public policy that private clubs and public courses be taxed residentially instead instead of commercially.
It's interesting because my grandparents actually, when they retired and moved here from New York, not to the lake area, but actually they were in St. Charles County, and they moved onto a property that later developed a golf course, and that changed their property taxes because, again, it was going from being a residential area to a commercial area. So again, you start to really see how just the addition of something like a golf course can completely change an area.
It can, and there are some exceptions here where some public golf courses have parts of the course assessed commercially. Private clubs are generally going to be just about everything there is assessed as residential. But for public courses, the land itself for the course is generally going to be assessed residentially, but some of the perhaps accoutrements like the clubhouse where the restaurant, the bar that they sort of serve food and drink at, a lot of that it can be taxed commercially. So it's a little more expensive to operate that for-profit business in those cases. And there's been some very interesting legal cases on it that explain why it's justified. And I think it's fair to tax nonprofits, at a slightly lower rate than for-profit enterprises. I want to stress, I don't think they should be getting any type of tax exemption as a nonprofit. Of course, they should be paying significant taxation for this type of endeavor. But we do I guess you could almost argue that through tax policy in Missouri, we sort of subsidize golf courses. And as much as I don't like subsidies, I do recognize that if you were taxing the full amount of a large golf course at the commercial rate, that would just be an enormous tax burden for these businesses and clubs to face. And I think you should be able to afford to go out and play 9 or play 18 at a reasonable rate in this state.
It is interesting that we are talking about a recreational activity and the fact that it does come into the workings of taxation policy in the state of Missouri, and honestly everywhere in the state of Missouri, where this is probably something that's not discussed very often.
Right, it is. It's probably not widely known, and the laws that guide this are state rules set by the State Tax Commission and state statutes. So it's pretty much the same around the state. Again, you do have some distinction where public courses are going to be taxed to some extent at a commercial level for parts of the property, where private clubs are going to be generally always assessed residentially. So that gives private clubs a small advantage. But then again, we do treat nonprofits differently in tax policy in a lot of ways in Missouri. And I think the residential assessment is a reasonable compromise. Nobody would ever suggest that these nonprofit clubs shouldn't be paying a pretty good amount in taxation. But I do think that the residential assessment is a fair compromise. And again, for the public courses, the not the private clubs, but just sort of public businesses there, the course itself, which is the bulk of their land, is also assessed residentially.
So I guess we'll see a run on people wanting to buy houses and golf courses now?
And that's one of the reasons for it. I mean, it sounds funny, but because, according to the State Tax Commission and the courts that have ruled on it, because many of these courses are surrounded by homes, they're taxed residentially because if it didn't exist as a golf course, it would probably be turned into residential usage. And that comes into, as strange as it may seem, that comes into why it is taxed residentially and not commercially. So that certainly does apply here.
David Stokes with the Show Me Institute in St. Louis, always bringing up some very fascinating topics of conversation here on the Morning Magazine. If folks would like to find out more about the Show Me Institute, please give us that website and then also your contact info as well.
Well, thank you again, Manny. I always enjoy being on each week with you and your listeners. We've got a lot of writings on property taxation and privatization, such as what we're talking about with private streets and the like, and privatization of other public services at showmeinstitute.org. And I'm always tweeting about these subjects as well, at David C. Stokes on Twitter.
Before I let you go, David, did you want to talk at all about your event next week?
Oh, I'd love to. We still
go
have
for
time to register for the Conservative Political Action Committee Conference, or CPAC, as it's commonly known. It's Saturday the 28th in St. Charles. The Show Me Institute is one of the co-sponsors of it. I want to be clear that we're sponsoring sort of the educational aspects of the conference, and we're not involved in the political aspects of the conference, which it's widely known for. That's not really our role there or our sponsorship. But I think for people out there interested in limited government principles, you can still get online and Google CPAC St. Louis and sign up for it and join us in St. Charles next weekend. It's going to be a great time.
Absolutely. Well, David Stokes with the Show Me Institute. We will talk with you again next Thursday right here on News Talk KRMS. Have a good week. And again, we'll be on next week with another edition of Show Me at the Lake.
Excellent, Manny. Talk to you then.
Thank you. David Stokes with the Show Me Institute in St. Louis. He is, again, with us every Thursday morning at about 10:15 for a segment we call Show Me at the Lake.